Hi, I'm Chef Robin. Thank you for joining us on this free video series. I'm here today to teach you about how to find culinary edibles in the forest, in your backyard, in meadows and marshes, all these lovely places you like to walk. Today, I'm going to teach you the fundamental technique, the fundamental technique to get you started foraging. This is the one thing at a time approach. So it's a very simple approach where you pick what you want to find. So if you love fiddleheads, if you love chanterelles, if you love morels, doesn't matter. Pick one thing so that you keep it simple, so that when you're walking in the forest, there's so much to look at and it gets overwhelming. So we want to keep this really simple for you. So the thing to do is to pick one thing. And today, we're going to start out with oyster mushrooms as an example of the one thing at a time approach. When I'm out in the forest looking for oyster mushrooms, so there's some right here, this is the Pleurotus family. What you want to do, again with the one thing at a time approach, you're looking for oyster mushrooms, and then there's a structured approach that you want to take. So first thing you want to do when you're looking for these little creatures is to look up. So you look up into the forest and you've got to find trees that are associated with these mushrooms. So oyster mushrooms love things like aspen, like birch, and in my area around the Pacific Northwest, alder. But that wood has to be dead. So basically what you're looking for is fallen alderwood trees in my area. So once that's on the ground, then the oyster mushroom will come along to decompose the tree that's fallen. So when you look up, you're looking for alder. So you've got to know how to identify alder first, right? So the first thing you're going to do, you look up, you find that alderwood, then you go into the forest and you hopefully find some nurse logs is what they're called, so the fallen dead wood. And then in summer to fall, so that's kind of the season for oyster mushrooms, you might find them. You wait till a rain comes, so the rain will come, soak a tree, and then they'll start fruiting in really large quantities. So these mushrooms are shelving fungi, so they'll sort of come up in large quantities and sort of, they form these little shelves. Like imagine you can put little books on them, right? And then after that, you want to be really careful about your ID then, right? So for oyster mushrooms, what you're looking for is decurrent gills. So the gills at the bottom of the mushroom, so there's the top of the mushroom, here's the bottom of the mushroom. These gills, so these little things, will run down the stem. That is super key for identifying this mushroom. So they have to run down the stem. The oyster mushrooms can get quite large, so from 2 to 10 inches across. In California, they get huge. In BC, this is around the size you'll find them at. So you find the dead wood, you're like, yes, it's growing on dead wood, and it's growing in a shelving fashion, and its gills are decurrent, so they're running down the stalk. They're also large enough so I can identify them properly. And then after that, you want to do a spore print. So the spores on an oyster mushroom are white to sort of lilac gray. And we have, so basically what you'll do is put this down on a white piece of paper with a black mark on it, and you leave it overnight, and those little spores, which are like the seeds of a mushroom, will dump down onto the page so you can see the color of them. So that's a really good identifying method as well. They don't have much of a stem as well, and sometimes the stem will be offset or not centered. So you know how a standard mushroom is like very centered? The stem on this will be off center and very short. There's not much of a stem on these. It's also really flat topped. There's no rings, so those little rings that happen on mushrooms sometimes on them. It's a really simple mushroom, basic one to identify. So one tip, a really important one about foraging for wild mushrooms is that you want to cook 100% of them. So when you go out into the forest and you find your oyster mushroom and you're like, yes, that is an oyster mushroom, you definitely want to cook it. And that's just for safety for one thing, and also for nutritional value. So a lot of mushrooms, you need to actually cook them so that your stomach can break them down into the nutritional components. But another really important tip is that some mushrooms are poisonous only if you eat them raw. So you're making sure that you're even more safe by cooking all the mushrooms that you find in the forest. That's the one thing at a time approach. So once you've found your first edible, so you're comfortable with oyster mushrooms, you feel confident cooking them in the kitchen, then you can add things to your repertoire. So then you want to add on chanterelles, you want to add on fiddleheads, you want to add on onions, whatever, wild onions. So it's the one thing at a time approach just gets you started, basically, and doesn't make you overwhelmed when you walk into an environment where you might find edibles. In my full program, so that's the Foraging for the Beginners program, I cover many different kinds of high-end culinary edibles that then you can take home and make yourself that star in the kitchen.